Welcome back to day 22 of our chess journey to 1500 ELO on chess.com. Let's jump on ahead into our game here today and see who our opponent's going to be. This is by far our highest rated opponent, our first opponent rated above 1400, called Bishop 16 from Turkey, I think. We will play 1d4 as per usual, and we will go into the Queen's Gambit. They play the Slav defense, and here I think we have a few different options, but I think I like defending this pawn. E3 here would disallow us from developing our bishop. But what happens if we develop our knight and then they capture? Here I'm actually not quite sure as to how we would approach regaining our pawn. It's probably fine from an engine standpoint, but I think we'll just play this to make sure we don't lose a pawn that we can't regain. They play their knight out, and here normally we would have liked playing our bishop out, but we can't do that right now. We have a few options here though. We could play our knight up, our other knight up. We could even look to fianchetto. Honestly, I don't mind playing this knight out to pressure here, because then we might have a long-term idea here of fianchettoing, and if we capture we might have a weakened pawn by our opponent that we could target with our diagonal here. They play their bishop out, and this is looking a lot like a reverse London setup by our opponent after this e6 move that might be coming. I think we'll go on ahead and play our knight out here to f3 probably. We could look to hit their bishop, but this does pretty much nothing, I think. I don't think we need to capture in the center either. We do have the option of playing the bishop onto this diagonal. But first of all, we will just play our knight. As with our bishop, I think we want to be a bit more flexible. They complete their London-esque setup here. And now I think we have the option of grabbing the bishop here. But first I'd like to play h3 here so they can't move on to this diagonal. They develop their bishop pretty quickly. And what happens here? They could drop back and open this up, but I don't really think it worries us too much. And here as well we might just delay recapturing, or capturing rather, and then we'll just continue our development. Maybe play some pawn moves on the queen side here and building up some more space. Our opponent proceeds to jump their knight in here. This is a threat against our knight that we just moved. If we capture, they can't really capture our knight straight away, as we have this in-between move here checking our opponent. or even this move here. And then we could capture their knight, so we will go ahead and take this bishop. Now they probably have to capture with the pawn here. I'm hoping they attack our knight, but that's not happening. Here I think we might be pretty happy with our position. If we go ahead and capture their d5 pawn, then they might capture our knight. But after this, they would have an isolated pawn. And this, I think we just develop normally. They might try to pin us, but I think even queen to c2 should work there. So let's go ahead and grab this pawn. They might try to pile on a lot of pressure on this pin, but we have enough pieces to defend it. So, do they have any other options here? I think they're probably deciding between capturing with their pawn or capturing here. They don't. And this is quite curious, I have to say. What happens if we capture their knight? Then they capture with the pawn. And I think we just get... They might have this. Alternatively here, if we capture, they don't have this straight away, as we just drop back. So they have to capture here. And if we go for this extra pawn, they might try to pressure this diagonal, but our pawns are defended. So I think we win a pawn here. Let's go on ahead and grab this. I guess our opponent might be intentionally gambiting a pawn to get their development here. But I don't think we have a lot of issues in our position, so I don't necessarily mind this. As we said, if we capture here, this diagonal is no real issue, as we can just defend. So let's grab this pawn and try to hold on to our material advantage. Queen to c2 here is quite interesting, just immediately hitting their exposed pawn. And if they open up this diagonal here, I think we would be pretty happy. Alternatively, we could look for a3 followed by b5, which I am liking, but that might be slow as we are a ways away from castling. Speaking of castling, I think we should probably look into doing so as quickly as possible. And that might just start with playing bishop to e2 here. Because our opponent, I think we might have time to play this actually, this maneuver here, as we kill a lot of the threats our opponent could pose, I think. Let's go with this. They play their rook out. And now I think we can't really delay our plans anymore, and we should just go ahead and castle. That's almost a misclick. Playing king e2 here would have been devastating. Let's go ahead and play our bishop to a solid e2 position. Eventually I think we could have an option of winning this pawn on e4. To defend it, our opponent might have to play f5, which is probably a very weakening move. So what does our opponent seek to accomplish with this queen move here? It doesn't really threaten us after castling here, I think. Not our king, at least. We should be good over here. Their queen can't access this diagonal because of our pawns. So if we castle, I'm not really seeing their move. Of course, they are hitting this pawn, but what is their move after we just capture with either our queen or our pawn? Let's just castle and see what our opponent has got in store for us. I think if we play solidly here, we should probably be in a good position trying to hold on to our pawn advantage. This queen move. I think our opponent is trying to look for a quick checkmate with their bishop and queen here, but I'm not seeing how their queen could coordinate with their bishop, as we have this diagonal controlled. Queen to c2 hits the pawn here, but I'm thinking of getting our bishop into the game. So what happens after b4? We could probably play like this, and our rooks should probably belong in the c file, which is why I'm a bit hesitant playing our queen out here. But we might play our queen to b3, targeting this pawn. But that's probably a bit too bad of a move, as it disallows us from pushing our pawn. Let's just go on ahead and prepare this kind of a development here by pushing our pawn to b4. They play their knight back, and it seems they're just going for an all-in attack against us, which means we probably have to spend some time here. And we have to spend some time to come up with a good defensive solution. But honestly, if they play their knight up, I think we probably have this bishop move, pinning the knight to the rook, and I think they lose a lot of their threats. So how about we just develop our bishop as we mentioned, and then go ahead and see what happens. This move and this, and I'm not seeing their continuation. If they jump in, honestly we couldn't capture the rook if we wanted to. But do we have this move here? Then we would hit their queen. They would have to move it. I guess they would want to stay along this file here. So probably g5, and if we move our queen up, then they are forced to make a trade, I think. then their attack is killed off, and we could probably just try to play with our pawn advantage. Or do we have a better response after this knight move here? Then g3 might actually be good, kicking the knight. And after we kick the knight, I think we could just go on ahead and capture the rook. So let's go for bishop to g4 instead of h5 and see what happens. I'm curious as to whether this bishop to h5 move might have been a bit better, but we will go ahead and see after the game. Alternatively, we might have not even had to respond that quickly to this threat here, but I think it's better to be safe than sorry. They move the knight back. That's a confusing move, because what happens after we just capture the rook? Then I think we are just up material, as I can't really see their threats. And then if we play our rook to c1, threatening to to remove more material from the board, they probably have to take or move their rook away. If they capture, that's no good for them. So I think we are in a pretty good position here. We just have to make sure our opponent doesn't checkmate us, and we might have our highest rated win so far. If we win here, we are going to get to 1399 ELO, one short of 1400, but it's going to be a massive win for us in that case. We just have to spend our time properly here and try to convert our material advantage. First of all, I want to connect our rooks, which can probably be done by moving our queen here, allowing it to get onto this diagonal and potentially defending against any threats here, which is all our opponents probably got left here. They move their knight back up, and this knight move here seems to want to play this. But after we play our queen to g4, then what does our opponent have left? I think we should be pretty good after queen g4, and if they trade, we get this position, and I think we should be winning without their queen on the board. If they move their queen, we could even get their pawn, and I think this is looking pretty good. We'll just go ahead and pre-move this, as it would be a forced move anyways, and then try to make some plans for afterwards. Or honestly, I guess our opponent also knows they shouldn't capture here, so let's go ahead and see what alternatives they have. They slide the queen over, which in turn allows us to pressure this pawn. And here we might have an interesting threat. If they go ahead and move their rook over. Never mind, I was thinking of a back rank attack, but that's not really working. So how about we just proceed to double up our rooks here. Playing rook c2 also threatens to play d5 with a discovery on their queen. So I'm liking this idea. As long as we get our pieces coordinated and into the game, I think we should be pretty happy here. We are up an exchange, a bishop for a rook, and we also have a pawn advantage, which is a passed pawn, and also defended in the center of the board here. On the board here, on d4. So do we find any threats our opponent could play? I was looking at h5, but I think I'm not really seeing their follow-up after we just capture the pawn. They might play this slower g6 followed by h5, but then I think we get a bit too much time to play and get our moves in. At least I don't think we want to make pawn moves of our own here right away, as that might weaken our king a bit too much. This move is a curious one, as I think it might win us a knight. Here they would have to move their queen. This would be attacked. This would be attacked. And if they move here, then we trade the queens, and I'm really liking this idea. What is their response? It seems they were prepared for our move. Okay, but this I think is pretty nice, as it allows us to trade off their bishop. And now our opponent does not have that much left in their position. They capture with the queen. What happens after our rook moves to c5? Defending our pawn, they can't play b5, and this would prepare doubling up. Let's go on ahead and play this. They might look for this infiltration hitting our a3 pawn, but they would have to move their knight first at least to do so. They move it back. And here I'm not really seeing any immediate threats. So we might as well just go ahead and double our rooks. Let's go like this. Here they might look for this, but they push this f-pawn. But doing this, however, probably forces a queen trade, or at least gets us into a better position after this move. We hit the knight through the queen, and here I think being up the trade, the exchange rather, should probably favor us a bit too much in the long term. Their knight on d6, however, is difficult for us to dislodge, as it defends this pawn, so we can't play like this, and we can't access the back rank. Our d5 pawn here, however, is pretty strong, and we might have an infiltration idea like this, I think. Yeah, let's go on ahead and play this. This is looking pretty optimistic. They can't move their knight because they would start losing their pawns, and then we would get onto this file and start threatening their king. We just have to look for their potential knight moves afterwards, but this I think should be fine for us. And the other geometric alternative for hitting our rook should also be fine. So we will go up, trying to preserve as much time as possible here. We have to be careful not to push this f pawn too early, I think, because then they might push their own pawn, and then they might get some counterplay. Let's hit this knight, I think. At the very least, we would win this pawn. They might play their rook up to e6 defending the knight here, but then we have the powerful rook c to c7. We go for this instead, which should win us a pawn. We will just go ahead and play our moves quickly here, so as not to lose on time. They jumped their knight into the middle of the board, which comes with a threat here of a fork. But this was going to be our move either way, so this fork is not that dangerous. If we just move out of the way and they capture our pawn, we decimate their king, I think. And here we should get two defended adjacent passed pawns, and we still have our passed pawn in the center of the board. And I'm not seeing easy ways of defending g7 for our opponent either. They would have to play the really awkward and passive move rook to g8, after which we would probably just take over the game. They will capture here, and we will go for their pawn here. Let's have a look at this. We might trade rooks here in this case, but I think our rooks are more powerful right now, so we might just go ahead and grab their pawns first. But they might have the idea of playing this, because they cover this. I think let's check their king first here. This is forced. And after this is forced. Here they would have to capture our rook. We capture their rook. And that should be winning, I think. But first of all, I'd like to play. Honestly, we might as well just kick their knight, but they are targeting our pawn here in the center. Pawn to d6 is kind of interesting. What would we respond with here? Threatening checkmate. This wouldn't work. We are running low on time here. How about an immediate g3? We would drop this pawn in the center, but grab theirs as well, so I think we should be happy here. We just have to play quickly, and as our position should be decisively winning because of our material advantage, we should be pretty happy here. They try to generate some counterplay here. Honestly, I was expecting the rook capture to fork our pawns, but they didn't go for it. Let's play up here. And now if we simplify, we should be incredibly happy, I think, with our passed pawns over here. So we might have this idea now. And capturing their rook, which we will go ahead and play, I think. There might be a better way of converting this, but that position should be pretty winning. Here we just deny their king from getting into the game here on the other side of the board. Let's just not let them cross this point here, so we could play without their king on the queen side. We will move on all the way back, I think. And then probably get behind our pawns here at some point as we push. This is a good move by our opponent, because it disallows both of those moves. But what happens if we just hit their knight like this? Alternatively, we could move our king up. Let's hit their knight and try to start pushing our pawns. They might have knight to a4, but then I think we push this pawn and get our rook in to dislodge their knight. Rook, or knight to b5 rather. I'm really not seeing their follow-up here. We just have to be careful not to get forked. But this should just give us tempi for pushing our pieces. This forks us, so we have to avoid that. We might just drop back behind our pawns with our king here, and we should be pretty safe. And there, I think we should just proceed with pushing our pawns. Their king still can't access our pawns here because of our rook. And I think b5 here is better than a5 because we still deny their potential knight moves. After b6, I'm not seeing their move. And here I think a5, or honestly, I think this should win straight away. This would force them to move their knight, and then we queen, and capture their knight as they capture our queen. And here we could just escort our a-pawn up the board. And I think we should be winning here. Perfect. That's our highest rated win so far this series, which I'm really happy with. As we mentioned earlier on, this win brings us up to 1399 ELO. Thanks a lot for the game, Bishop16 from Turkey, and let's jump on ahead into our game review. So today we played with an accuracy of 88.9 and our opponent played with an accuracy of 82.1. We have this pretty normal Queen's Gambit style opening. And here we should have apparently went here immediately instead of playing the h3 preparing this move. Then after this, this was apparently a pretty good move. Their bishop is stranded and they have to defend this. This makes a lot of sense, and then we could push their bishop afterwards, after they defend this pawn, and we should be able to trade it for our knight or something else, I think. Either way, this position is pretty good. We went for this instead, but here we should have apparently just traded bishops. It doesn't quite make sense to me, but I guess it's because we were so far away from castling here. They made a mistake here and we capitalized on it. And this chain of captures seems to have been correct. We did lose a bit of our advantage here after playing this move to a3, because apparently we should have just shielded our diagonal in another way by also developing our bishop. They play their rook out, and we castled here, calling their bluff on this king side. This was apparently even a mistake, which is quite curious as I'm not really seeing why, but I guess this bishop to d2 maneuver was long overdue probably. We developed in this way instead. Bishop to d2, what does that move accomplish? I'm not really seeing the strengths of this move instead of this. This defends our a3 pawn and threatens potential discoveries, and also defends our passed pawn. This might have had the additional idea of playing over here and potentially opening up, but I'm not quite sure. Well, we found this move, and here our opponent blundered. They played their knight up, and this was actually the best move. We should have captured the pawn, but I was a bit hesitant doing so, and we still maintained a massive advantage despite not, so I'm quite happy. This allowed for us to simplify a lot here, but here we should have actually captured, which makes a lot of sense. Or does it? What happens after this move? We would capture. They might capture. Of course, we would have had a back rank mate. Well, we just went on ahead and captured their bishop and doubled up our rooks. We traded queens and infiltrated their back rank. From this point on, the game was pretty trivial, as we just converted our lead and made sure to avoid any forks or counterplay from our opponent. They tried to make some difficult decisions for us. For example, if we moved up here with the natural move opposing the enemy king, then we would have been forked. Here we made a pretty normal, we played a pretty normal idea of cutting their king off and then just pushing our pawns where they couldn't really counter us. And we got to this position, and our opponent realized the game was essentially over and resigned. Well, that's our game for today, guys. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope to see you all tomorrow. Bye bye!